the way you ease somebody into the truth is actually just tell them a story, like show it to them gradually, because that's how truth really gets a hold of you, is gradually. And literature does that in such a beautiful way.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Entering yawn time.
Yes, we are. But you had much coffee, so we're all right.
Yeah, you should be fine.
All right.
Welcome to Classical Etc. My name is Paul Schaefer. I'm here with Martin Cothran, Tanya Charlton, and Jeremy Breland. Now, Jeremy, you've been with us before, but just for those that didn't watch that one episode, you are the, what's your official title now at Highlands?
I am the dean of the 9th through 12th grade students there at the full-time school.
Oh, and that's why you got invited today, because we're talking about upper school curriculum, parts, objectives, tips. This is going back to a listener question we had, I don't know, a month or two ago, and we went through primary, we went through grammar school, and now we're going to do upper school. And so this will be a good conclusion to that listener question series. I don't know that she realized we were going to make a series out of her question, but yeah, I mean, we do what we want on this podcast. So first we need to start with, what are we reading? Jeremy, normally we give the guest time to think about it, but what are you reading?
I am prepared for this one. Tanya told me to prepare for it, so it's the only thing I've actually prepared for. And I've prepared for it in the most, probably...
As we walk down the steps.
Exactly, yeah. I'm in the time right now, I'm just going to go ahead and give myself an excuse. I'm in a time right now of the year where I am reading a lot and not doing a whole lot other than reading the things that I'm reading for the school. So I teach 11th grade literature, so we are like neck high in Anna Karenina. Actually, we are finishing it not this week, but next week. So I'm very deep in Anna Karenina. But I was telling you as we were walking down the hallway, I've been thumbing through Chesterton's Ballad of the White Horse. Mm-hmm. So it is a lovely piece. I'm enjoying it. I was actually turned on to the text from Kyle Yonke. So actually he kind of raised the stakes on it and said that if I haven't read that, then we couldn't be colleagues.
So he feels fairly strongly about it.
Yes.
That very much sounds like a Kyle comment. Yes.
So we have agreed that we're going to read it, and then we're going to go to a restaurant, undisclosed restaurant, and we're going to discuss the text when I finally finish it.
It's undisclosed because you're afraid of the paparazzi that are going to come.
Paparazzi, yeah, that's right. They're following us through the tunnels and such.
You mentioned Anna Karenina. How many times have you taught that?
This is my third year teaching Anna Karenina.
Okay, so you're still, because you mentioned read it, and obviously as a teacher, you're going to reread it and prep for it. But I wonder how many times you have to teach that to the point where you're just like,
don't need to read it again.
Yeah, you've read it so many times.
It's just so big.
I think because of the size of it, you'll never get to that place. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm going into Gatsby after this, and I know what happens in chapter 5 of Gatsby because the book's only 180 pages, but this book is 817 in our copy. So I don't remember what happened in part 5, chapter 32. I have to reread those things.
Yeah, when I was teaching it at the online school, I had read it 2 or 3 times, and then there was just certain sections I could go back to, and I didn't have to read the whole thing. But I'm interested because this is relevant to our topic today. How do upper school students handle that book?
Really well. I mean, a lot better than I would think. When I have a 800-page book that I set down that's the size of a brick, and I go, we're going to read this for like half the year. Usually students tell me at the very end, toward the end of reading it, I was getting tired because we've been in it for 3-4 months. I mean, you have to marry the book in a kind of way to get through it. It's like, this is about all I'm reading now, just because it's so encompassing. We read about 60 pages a week. So I give them a whole week to be able to read it, but then we can't cover 60 pages in 4 days. So I'm hitting like big points. Sure. And the kids really take it really well.
But the interesting thing is in our curriculum, looking back from Anna Karenina backwards, I don't think there's any book that requires that much time except 2nd grade Little House in the Big Woods, which is their very first big book, and it requires a lot of time. And it's just such a difference between that and Anna Karenina, but we're really doing the same thing. Yeah. Like just that they're so invested in it for so long.
Well, and also the way we've got it positioned at the full-time school is it's in 11th grade. So the students are very used to conversation-based literature classes. They're very used to talking with the teacher and breaking the things apart. Actually, by the 11th grade, I'm pretty used to letting them go and read it. And then we come back and talk about it. We'll read certain sections of it and certain swaths of it. We'll read a chapter and talk about it, or read a couple paragraphs and talk about it. But I'll make allusions to Little House in the Big Woods. I'll make allusions to Farmer Boy. I'll make allusions to those things because really we are doing the same thing in 11th grade literature as we are in 2nd grade
thematically,
literature. Yes.
The agrarianism.
Yeah.
In both of those books.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
we had a recent podcast episode on that. So, for those that are,
was he here?
I don't know.
I could have been here. And I
For
didn't
those that are interested,
I have no recollection of that.
Martin, what are you reading?
I actually brought what I'm reading because they were in my pack because I was reading these books on our memoriacollege.org trip to Europe. And I've gone back. I go back to this frequently. Quintilian. He makes so much common sense about education, even though he's a Roman writer, writing in the first century, really. And so I've been back to that as my sort of official education book that I'm reading. And then I was talking about this with Paul on the plane. There's a book called Gods, Graves, and Scholars by C.W. Sarum. And it's the story of all the great archaeological discoveries and what went, the stories of the people who discovered these things.
So
and
like
their background.
Heinrich Schliemann is in there.
Schliemann's in there, and the discovery of Troy. You've got the figuring out the Rosetta Stone and the Egyptian hieroglyphs, which was a completely different kind of language, so they had to really change the way they thought in order to interpret this thing. And it goes all the way up to Mesoamerica and the discoveries in Meso. So I'm about halfway through, and it's a scholarly book in the sense that you're learning all these things about ancient civilizations. It's also a bunch of adventure stories, which is what's really cool about it.
Oh, yeah.
You and your adventure stories.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
I was just telling somebody today that what I need to find is a book that is interesting enough that I want to pick it up every day, not important enough to me that I'm okay falling asleep in the middle of it, but I need kind of that.
Sounds like
balance.
a British murder mystery to me.
I don't know.
Somebody that doesn't require a great deal of intense thought,
correct.
but that is informative and
I need something at night.
Right, there you go, bud.
Is that what I need?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
You're pretty quick to give that away.
He gives away old books a lot.
Yes, he does. He carries them around in his trunk if you ever need a book.
Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah.
My library.
It's
You
my
know
traveling
why?
library. My
Because
bookmobile.
his wife gets mad if he buys more books, so he hides them in his trunk till he can sneak them in the house.
it's Martin's black market of books in his trunk.
I age them in the trunk of my car before I bring them in.
We've gone
and then I bring them in late at night when
we've gone to homeschool conventions before where his wife has said to me, "Don't let him buy any books." Now, do you think I have control over that? Every time he would come back into the booth, he would have a bag of books.
It's a line item
I
in
think
the
my
family
wife doesn't
budget.
watch this show. That's all I have.
Well, why doesn't she?
I don't know.
I'm thinking.
Oh boy, I got to
Hello?
think
Maybe we
about
should
that.
change the topic.
Okay, Tanya, it's your turn.
So I just went to the St. Louis Homeschool Convention with Miriam, our new conventions manager, and it was her first convention. And so I just took her to help set up the booth and figure that out. And then on the way, it was a 4.5 hour drive. On the way, I asked her what she was reading because she had a book. And she was reading Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, which was on my list because you had told me that it was really good.
It was on my list years ago, and I took it off because
it became political. It just got political. And so I had kind of taken it off my list too. But I thought, well, this would be nice for her then. So I have a bunch of Audible credits. So I got the book and we listened to it, started listening to it on the way and listened on the way back some. And, it's really good. It really rings true to me, what I know about Appalachia and the Deep South, poverty in the Deep South, and the Rust Belt, all of those areas I've been in. And, I've lived in the Deep South for years. And then Dave's from the Rust Belt area. So I've just seen these. I feel like it was just such a real story. You've read it, right?
I have not read it. I have.
Well, you told
been
me to
sitting
read
there.
it.
Well, that's
okay. Well, I
that
think
doesn't mean that
it's
I
in
read
your
it.
trunk.
I really wish I'd read it before he got political, because now, you just, politics just becomes a part of it. But I do think it is a very good book about a big problem that nobody knows how to fix. And how he got himself out of there. There's quite a bit of language in it when he's quoting his grandparents and his mother. I mean, it's just this one heck of a story. But anyway,
And
I've enjoyed it, and I do recommend it on Audible because he reads it. And so then it really does feel more like he's just telling the story of his life.
Well, you're the second person in 2 or 3 days who's recommended that, who's recently read that book and recommended it. There's somebody on one of our panels at the conference who was talking, maybe Jay Weil, I think, who's been reading it and absolutely loves it.
It's hard to read. It's a difficult subject, but if you've read Demon Copperhead, is that the name?
Yeah, you
Demon
talked about that a long time.
Barbara Kingsolver. It's kind of the same thing, only his story, I guess, is real.
Yeah.
And hers was fiction. But it is a real problem. And it's just, the main question, I think, is how do you fix it? He got out. How did he manage to get out? He credits all of the people in his life, even his hillbilly grandparents.
And you're talking about J.D. Vance, who's the current vice president. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I have been reading, I was talking about reading Orthodoxy, and now I'm going back, and I'm reading the chapter again to prep for class, but I'm also listening to it. And in recent memory, that's like the first time I've gone and I've immediately gone back to a book again, and reading it in multiple ways. So this, I guess in some ways I'm reading this like for the third time, because I'll listen to it.
Right.
And then I'll go back and I'll read it to prep for class. And that is such a great exercise. It is such a great exercise.
I find that helpful too, especially with a big book.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say Orthodoxy is a particular big book. It's just
no, but it's
a hard book. We're talking
dense.
Chesterton here.
It's
right?
dense.
It's dense. Yeah. All right, let's move on to our listener question. And Bridget emailed us with a question about what is classical education and what's neoclassical. So let me read what Bridget says. As I continue to dive deeper into the world of educational philosophy, I'm hearing more and more about a distinction between modernized or neoclassical classical education and true classical education. How would you define these terms, and where do you feel that Highlands Latin School and the Memoria curriculum fall in regard to this? Bridget has another question, but this is the one we're going to address today. Martin, you seem anxious.
Well, I think that what that usually refers to, the neoclassical, is usually referring, in my experience, to the influence of Dorothy Sayers' essay on the 3 stages of learning, right? And we've talked about this before. I wrote an article on this that I think everyone pretty much agrees with now, that she's not giving a definition of classical education. If you asked Dorothy Sayers what classical education was, she would answer it like we do. It's passing on our civilization and trying to make better human beings out of each one of our students. And so the neo aspect of it, I think, of her stages of learning approach, is that it's a developmental taxonomy. Okay, she's doing Benjamin Bloom before Benjamin Bloom ever makes his famous, 7-stage taxonomy of learning. Hers is really a simpler taxonomy than that. It's 3 stages of learning, and it has to do with how children learn, because all modern pedagogy is focused almost exclusively on how children learn rather than on what they're learning. And whereas classical education, and this is in Mortimer Adler's 3 pillars of teaching, is not focused on how children learn. It's focused on what they're learning, and the method you use to teach something depends not on how the children learn, but what the subject is, what it is you're trying to teach. So if you're teaching knowledge acquisition, you're being more didactic. You're teaching in a more direct instruction type of way. If you're teaching skills, that's coaching. You come alongside the student and you're helping them work through a problem or figure out letter sound correspondences and reading, whatever it is. And then thirdly, the understanding of ideas and values, which is more discussion oriented. So the way you're teaching depends on what you're teaching. So Dorothy Sayers is I hate to say it, but a little progressivist in that respect, because that's what the progressives do. They're all focused on how children learn. Now, that I don't think she has a lot of the shortcomings of progressives, but I'm just saying that this post-psychology age that we're in is very focused on the how children learn. In this is all teachers' colleges. That's all they talk about, and so she's classical. She's a classical writer. Her commentaries on Dante are my favorite. But that taxonomy of learning, 3 stages of learning thing, had really kind of is what started classical education. It kind of took over people's minds, and they thought that's what classical education was.
It.
We restarted, after its decline at the turn of the 20th century.
So neoclassical would be the not the original classical education that, like, say, the founding fathers had, that has been around forever.
It's focused on.
It's not just that we've brought it back, so we're calling it neoclassical, but it's literally a different definition.
Right. I mean, that's the way I hear it in terms of usage. I hear it as really referencing Dorothy Sayers, whereas what we're doing is a paleo classical education.
And to maybe clarify a little bit is that the paleo, if we're going to use that term, paleoclassical, has a significant influence on certain knowledge that you're teaching. Not just that you're teaching knowledge, but certain knowledge, right? So specific knowledge. So Latin is essential to that project. The classical civilizations are essential to that project. And that is a large thing that distinguishes, I think, classical from neoclassical, because neoclassical is like basically if you follow this pedagogical paradigm, this method, then you can call yourself classical. Whereas classical in sort of the ancient and medieval senses is no, you are going to be teaching the liberal arts. And there are certain ways that you teach that. You're teaching grammar through your Latin. You're teaching, you're teaching persuasion, even in the way that you're going to be reading Shakespeare and Cicero and all of these things. But you're also going to be teaching, as you said, those ideas and values.
Yes.
Yeah, and it respects the child too. That like we're here together. We're going to think together. We're going to wrestle with this text together. I don't need to build it in such a way that you may understand it. Like we're going to come together and read it together, and we're going to discuss it together. Not like I need to digest it in a certain kind of way and then kind of feed it to you because you're at a certain time of development.
Yeah. I mean, you have to make adjustments to your audience, like a paleo classical teacher in rhetoric would tell you to do. But it's not so focused on psychology as a lot of its modern stuff is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I think that's liberating for a teacher too, where I can actually focus back on my subject. Of course, I'm going to speak to a sixth grader differently than I'm going to speak to a 12th grader, right? But I'm going to be able to focus on my subject because that's just like a moving target to because the science will change, right? We will think different things about different things when the student is a certain age.
I don't have to take 12 classes on psychology in teachers' college to do that.
That's right. Yeah. I can just learn my field well, right? And learn how to deliver my field well. Yeah.
Which is that's how we are able to do what we do and why our upper school curriculum even looks like it does, because we are guiding those students after we've given them the foundation from the very beginning. So we can get from Little House in the Big Woods to Anna Karenina.
Yeah, and in a kind of way, we'll never be done with Little House in the Big Woods.
Right.
We will always kind of revisit Little House in the Big Woods. I mean, really, truly. Yeah.
On that note, so I've got a little positive feedback that I want to read.
Is it about me?
It's nice. It's about all of us. Okay, so this was sent by Laura, and Laura said, first of all, I used the Memoria Press curriculum this past year for my kindergartner and second grader, and we have absolutely loved it. Because of the podcast and your materials, I myself have read Anna Karenina, Pride and Prejudice, The Scarlet Letter, and just got through The Brothers Karamazov. I never would have read those books otherwise, and I see how important great fiction is for our humanity. So thank you. And then she has some actual curriculum questions that are not for the podcast, but she has a postscript, and I wanted to read this postscript.
Is it about me?
It's about all of us. I listen to the podcast regularly, and despite what appeared like some negativity around the Charlotte Mason episodes, I really appreciated them. I read some of her work, and it never quite seemed right to me for what I wanted for my kids, and I am so grateful for Memoria Press. I wish everyone that has left a negative comment on the podcast in particular would give Memoria Press a try and see how great it is. So I just felt that was worth reading. Every once in a while, things need to be said. On to our topic. So, upper school. Curriculum, its parts, its objectives, tips. We've done this with primary school and grammar school curriculum already. Should we just go subject by subject?
Yes, I do think, though, let's just give a disclaimer here, just for the sake of confusion, that Jeremy teaches the accelerated program at Highlands Latin School. So we will try, when things go a little bit off, to bring it back around to the majority of our audience who are not using the accelerated curriculum. But generally, I went through, and we're basically, if you're not using the accelerated curriculum through our high school, the only thing you're missing is possibly art and architecture if you choose to do Introduction to Philosophy. Or there are a few titles, literature titles, that you miss, but everything else we get to. So people aren't really missing anything not to do the Highlands Latin School path.
The grade may be a little slightly off.
That's right. That's right. So I just wanted to, because it could get confusing to people.
Yeah.
Because in his head, he's living. He's living in a different world.
Yeah. So when I say 11th grade, it might actually be 12th grade or
that's
whatever.
Right. That's right.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Well, let's start with Latin because that feels like the right place to start. And so starting in 7th grade, we've got 3rd form, then 4th form Latin, and then we go into readings of classical authors. So I guess, that was the very brief way of saying what we do. But Jeremy, what's the objectives? Like, what do you, when you're looking at a 11th or 12th grader, what are you hoping they're doing in that Latin class? What do you hope they're getting out of that?
Sure, yeah. So we teach in a grammar-based form. So we're really, really focused on the grammar. There's some other forms of learning Latin that are more reading and kind of immersion kind of forms. We want the student to really, really understand the grammar. And that aids me in a literature class or a classical studies class because the kids know what the predicate nominative is. And that's a big deal. Sometimes they have a little hard time going like, like litote in Latin is litote in English, and it's actually the same literary device. So there's a little play there across the two. But our objective in the Latin sequence is for students to not only understand the grammar, feel pretty good about the grammar by the time that they get to 9th, 10th grade, but also to start in the 9th grade, be able to dive into the text, to read Caesar's De Bello Gallico, to be able to read Cicero, to be able to read Ovid. It's always encouraging for me, who I'm not a Latin scholar. I don't know Latin that well. I'm actually teaching myself now, but to be able to hop into our 12th grade Latin and to watch the kids breaking apart certain lines of Augustine, and for the teacher just to sit down on that stool and go, all right, everybody, let's talk about that sentence for just a second. Like, just pull off from the Latin. We just read it. We just translated. Like, let's talk about what Augustine actually just said there too. So not only just to understand the Latin, but also actually read the Latin text, to be able to understand like what Poseidon is doing here, or be able to understand what Augustine's making a point of.
I think that's an important point, because we talk about in the grammar school, right? Grammar school or grammar-based teaching Latin. And for students to realize, or for people to realize that our students are approximating basically as closely as we can, right? This medieval ideal where they would have learned Latin, they would have been reading those texts in the Latin and discussing that, but they were also living in a culture in which it was expected for people to be able to speak Latin. And we don't live in that culture anymore, but we are still getting them that experience in the last few years of their high school.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's also fun for the students. I mean, we go on a yearly trip to Rome where students can actually read the inscriptions on the buildings. They can actually understand certain words and like works of science. So our science teachers are starting to incorporate more Latin into their pieces, especially biology, because, they have these Latin names for different trees, different animals, things like that. And it's exciting for a student to see like, oh, this actually is the foundational way that we've talked about certain subjects that are not just like my very compartmentalized, Latin class. That this makes a difference in theology, and this makes a difference in medical science and biology and so on and so forth. Well,
and the way you think, I mean, learning another language is learning another way of thinking in many ways.
Absolutely.
I mentioned before, I read the church daily gospel reading from the Latin Vulgate. And it says things differently than you would say it in English, and it means the same thing if you translate it, but yet it
hits you differently.
It hits you differently, yeah.
Yeah, and also it makes you slow down.
Yes, absolutely.
It makes you slow down. It makes you
and focus on every word.
Every actual word, like every case ending means something there. Where a student who's pretty familiar in English, they can skim a page and they can run through it, or pretty familiar with math, they can kind of skim a problem and learn through it. Latin will not let you do that. Like you have to focus, like where is my verb? Where's my direct object? Let me start to ascertain where my parts of speech are here, and then to start translating. So
let's move on then to literature. Tanya, what's our goal? I mean, Jeremy's over here teaching literature, but from a sort of a broad curriculum perspective, which we're doing 4 or 5 works a year, maybe one.
If it's Dante.
But what's our goal there? What are we getting done?
Well, Jeremy would answer this so much better than me.
I don't know about that.
But our choices are to give students a really broad understanding of some great classics before they go to college. If they major in English in college, they're going to read wonderful things, hopefully. I don't know, maybe not these days, but I did. But it's been a long time ago. I don't think you can guarantee that now. But we do Shakespeare every year. The capstone is Dante's Divine Comedy in full. And it's literally just, I can't remember. Recently I heard, maybe in a podcast, somebody was talking about literature and how that is the way that we learn what it means to be human, is through literature. We learn what happened in history, but literature actually teaches us how to live, or how not to live, as Kyle would say.
Sure.
When he said, I said, why read The Great Gatsby? And he said, because we don't only want students to see how to live in their literature, but they need to see how not to live as well.
Sure. Yeah.
And Gatsby takes care of that.
Yeah. And to be able to like see things in this world, right, that are an admixture of the best of times and the worst of times, right? I mean, to see things in this world and to be able to ascertain which is which, because this world is an admixture, right? So like you're just thinking about Gatsby and thinking about our conversation about Gatsby. Gatsby ought not be, how should you say, like prescriptive, like don't go be Gatsby, right? Like,
that's right.
Don't go do the things he did necessarily.
But the students do need to be, they need a guide for a book like that, because they won't necessarily recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, I mean, we have to constantly keep saying, what is wrong with this picture?
Yeah,
why are these people so unhappy?
Yeah. I love to think of it in a certain way, like what did that author see in this world, right? And even beyond this world, like what did that author see? And what were they so in love with that they wanted to tell me about it, right? That they wanted to tell a story about it. I think actually, and I mean, I'm a little biased. I'm a literature teacher, so I'm going to put kind of literature up here at the top, toward the top. I always think about Nathan and King David. Like when Nathan comes to David to tell him about his sin with Bathsheba, he doesn't just come out and proverbially say, like, David, you've sinned. He tells David a story because he wants David to see that thing and he wants him to feel it. Like he wants him to be eased into the truth. And then once he realizes that actually the thing Nathan's trying to tell me is me, like I've messed up, that's the success of a literature class. When they see that thing. I mean, I love the way Emily Dickinson puts it in her poem. I'm forgetting the title of it now. It's lightning to a child eased or something like that. Truth to a child eased, where she's saying like, if I just tell you the truth, you may be too dazzled by it, or you may get offended by it. You may back up, but the way you ease somebody in the truth is actually just tell them a story. Like show it to them gradually, because that's how truth really gets hold of you, is gradually. And literature does that in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, I was giving one of my talks this year is why literature is important. And I've always said that a story, a narrative, provides the only context in which you can determine whether an action is right or wrong. Mm-hmm. Okay? But I never could really explain why that is. Why is it that a story does what happened with in the David story you're talking about? And I finally figured it out, and I'm so proud of myself.
You might be.
Would you like to know what it is? Okay, here it is. Okay, please. So the action is right or wrong depending on several things. Mm-hmm. One, is the action done with the right person? There are certain things you do with one person you don't do with other people, right? Mm-hmm. Is it done in the appropriate place? Is it done at the appropriate time, in the appropriate way, for the appropriate reason? And if you get any one of those things wrong, then the action is wrong. You have to literally get all of those right. Well, how do you determine the appropriate place, person, time? The only way you can do it is in a story, because the story provides the context for determining all those things.
Absolutely. I mean, we're just going through. I just had a conversation with my students just last week about Vronsky and Anna Karenina, and he is doing good things. And it feels kind of weird in class to say that Vronsky is doing a good thing here, but I actually take a little marker and I try to set it on my book on the lectern, and I try to set it up. It's like Vronsky's doing a right thing, my marker will just naturally fall over. But it's going to fail. Like every single time he's doing the right thing, but he's doing it in the wrong way, at the wrong time, with the wrong person, right? I can go in there and look at the way Gatsby does certain things and I go, good. Look at the way he loves. Like, look at the way he treasures things. Look at the way that he just thinks life is so full of potential, but wrong time, wrong place, wrong motivation, wrong motivations. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and all of that, kind of what we're doing in all that literature, we're also doing in the beginning of our upper school classical studies and Christian studies track, right? Sure. Because they're going through the Iliad, they're going through the Odyssey, the Aeneid. And not only are they seeing it in those works, but they're seeing it in the history of those civilizations that they're going through again. They're starting to see the history of the church and seeing where decisions were made in the church that were for good or for ill, and then we spend the last couple of years, I like to say, in contemplating goodness, truth, and beauty, right? Because in our year where we're going through the Republic, the laws on obligations, Cicero, the City of God, it's mainly ethics, right? It's all what does the good consist of. And then the philosophy course is what is the truth, and the art and architecture course is beauty, right? And apologetics is kind of like the capstone of all of those things coming back together, because the books we are using basically all of those arguments to then argue for the Christian faith. And so we shift from that story to some more analytical stuff. I mean, it's nonfiction. Like, let's just dig into the theory of it, because we're not saying it's either this or it's that, but it's both. We need to give the students both of those things.
And you've got segued in there Greek tragedies. So
how does that fit?
Yes, because we're going, those are story, but I feel like they're story on a whole different level than the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid.
Yeah, I mean, those really are, because those were performances for the Greek people, right? Though that really is I think the Greeks working out their it's their morality in high relief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of like the most in your face literary ethical conundrums.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
History
Antigone,
and myth.
Oedipus. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Oedipus. What a story.
Oh, well.
It is
I can
the
usually
greatest
tell.
story ever.
I can usually tell around the time of the year that the ninth graders get into Oedipus. We have a few conversations in the hallway, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, go
And
back
then
to
they get
Yep.
really interested in class.
Yeah. But just to piggyback off of what you're saying, we really do ease them into that more analytical inquiry of like, what is actually goodness? But by the time they get there, they're equipped with story.
Mm-hmm.
They're equipped with story from the classical studies. They're equipped with stories from their literature. They're equipped with stories so that they're able to, actually a teacher's able to draw illustrations from different texts, like Aeneas fleeing Troy, right? I mean, we can look there and go like, yeah, he wasn't a believer in Jesus Christ. He was a pagan, but like, isn't what he was doing virtuous? Like, he did not leave his father behind. He did not leave his child behind. He actually respected tradition. He respected his gods. And we can go back and make illustrations of that in, like you said, your metaphysics class or in the in any kind of class. Truly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's very helpful
Yeah.
teaching philosophy to have to know what stories the students have gone through because you can draw that out.
You need to know what goodness is before you try to explain it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what some of
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
goes to.
Yeah.
Martin, let's go to you. At least in our catalog, we've got a section of grammar and logic where we in the 7th, 8th grade years, we're doing some grammar, but then in 9th grade, we flip to logic and rhetoric. What are we doing in logic and rhetoric?
Well, you've done grammar, which is basically the structure of thought. And then, you go to logic, and this is how you use language for purposes of trying to come to the truth. And Aristotle, and it just amazes me to this day how you have this thinker 2,000 years ago who basically had the complete package on this. And so our program is Aristotelian logic. It's the logic you actually use in real life. It's not the mathematical kind of stuff, which has its own use, but most programs are that modern sort of mathematical logic, which is not what you use in real life. So we're taking language and we're taking grammar because you have to know your grammar in order to do logic. You have to know what a subject is. You have to know what a predicate is. You have to know what a copula is, because that's all used in there. And so we're building on that grammar foundation, and Aristotle, I don't know how it doesn't seem to be, there doesn't seem to be much precedent for Aristotle on this. He figures this out, and he's such a deep thinker that he can come up with exactly how you reason. And then the medievals come along after that, and they tidy it up, and they come up with the 19 valid argument forms. That's sort of implicit in Aristotle, but it's not explained. And the medievals take Aristotle's logic, which if you tried to read the prior analytics and all that, it'd be very difficult to figure out. I know I've heard people say, well, we're classical. We need to go back to Aristotle, and you're going to use Aristotle to teach your students. Good luck with that, because the medievals came along and they were intellectual nannies. They cleaned everything up. They made it teachable. So a lot of my program is based on this cleaned up medieval version of Aristotle, and it just makes it so much easier to teach.
So traditional logic, is that where it's teaching them how to reason, or it's giving them the...
Yeah,
that's the forms.
Okay.
That's the, yeah.
Okay, so then material logic, what's that?
Material logic, so there's two kinds of logic. There's formal logic, which is very structured. And
Traditional
that's
logic.
traditional logic, yeah. And then material logic is basically the other branch of logic, which nobody wants to talk about anymore, because what it really is Aristotelian metaphysics. It's the basis of thought. Not the strictly formal logical thought, but there's other aspects of thought that are structured, that are not the how you make a syllogism. A logical
you have to talk about what the essence of a thing is, and what is, does the thing have a vegetative soul or an animal soul or a rational soul. And so you're working on definitions. And so, when you learn syllogisms in traditional logic, you can have a valid syllogism that comes to a false conclusion because your premises were false. And that's where material logic steps in to say, well, your premise was false because you didn't define your term properly or something along those lines. And so that's where that's why
I'm more concerned with content than structure.
Yeah. And that's why I say material logic, I really want students to have done that before they hit my metaphysics or classical philosophy course, because it really preps them for, they get some ideas and I don't think they fully understand it. And then when we go through the process in classical philosophy, it starts to click more, but material logic preps them for that.
Yeah, because you're going to learn 10 categories, 10 kinds of concepts. You're going to learn the 5 predicables, the 5 ways of saying something. You're going to learn definition and Aristotle's 4 causes, the 4 ways you can define something. And you're going to learn division, which is basically, and I have not seen this anywhere, how to outline. Where did they teach how to outline? Well, Aristotle did it, and it's in material logic. Yeah.
And then we have rhetoric, which is taking that the art of rhetoric is taking sort of the logical things we have and making them persuasive, right? But your course is more, it's because it's using Aristotle's text. So we don't use prior analytics for logic, but we do use this rhetoric for rhetoric.
Yeah.
But we're doing it with 12th graders.
But we're doing it with 12th graders, but this is very much the theory of persuasion.
Yes.
Okay. Math and science. This is probably very important because as much as we love the language arts, we love talking about literature and what we're reading and Latin and those things. This is something that our students go far in at Highlands, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's the progression? What's our goal? How do we get there?
Sure. Yeah. So starting in 7th grade, we're in pre-algebra. Coming out of the arithmetic of the lower school, we're in pre-algebra, and we build the normal, logical way. Pre-algebra, algebra 1, algebra 2, geometry. Getting into the junior year, right around the time a kid's a 16, 17-year-old, then they're able to either hop into a more advanced track or take our normal track that leads to calculus at the end. Some students go all the way up to a calculus 3 currently. The goal of that is to think reasonably. I mean, we want to understand how the physical world makes sense. And we can actually measure that, like quantitatively measure that in mathematics. And then beyond that, it is another thinking course. It is another reasoning course. I've stepped into Calc 3 classes where our seniors, who are our most advanced math classes, I'll step into the back of those things and I'll watch the teacher looking at the board with the students, and they are like reasoning out how next to proceed in this very, very complicated thing that takes up the whole board. It's like completely beyond me, but it always strikes me that this is actually a course in reasoning. Like I have to pull out my tool bag now. Like what will work here of what I've learned, up even from just basic algebra. What will work right here? How am I gonna balance this equation? So it's a course in reasoning how the physical world actually works. And like you said, our students go quite far with it. Actually, a lot of our students who graduate from the full-time school go into math-based fields because they can, because they're rather good at it by that point in time.
And that in that sort of perspective towards mathematics is a very much a liberal arts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perspective.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of life is just figuring things out. And there's 2 ways to do that. One's qualitative, and we do that in the way we teach language arts, and the other's quantitative, which you do in math and geometry.
Yeah.
And so our science is standard, right? You've got physical science, biology, chemistry, physics. And you have time maybe for an AP course or human anatomy or something. And all of those things, it's learning the natural world while also trying to apply the mathematical tools we've learned
absolutely
to the real world, right? It's not just you've got this reasoning ability that's totally ethereal and you never apply it to the real world. That's what's happening in the science class, right?
Yeah. And I think it actually, just like it does in a humanities class, it leads to grandeur. Like it leads to awe at the end of the spectrum here. Like after you've learned and after you've mastered a concept, I mean, I'll step into a physics class and they'll be working through something, working through force and time and gravity. And it's just, I'm just thinking like, wow, this is excellent. This is how the world works. And the Lord's built the world in such a way that like we can measure and understand it and it makes sense. Like at the end of the day, when it doesn't make sense, we're the ones that are wrong. Like we don't understand it yet. So we have to keep going. We have to dig deeper.
Well, to me, this is like, this is an implicit, our whole program is an implicit argument for the existence of an intelligent God. I mean, how can you look at the universe in the way these subjects let you look? And how can that exist without some intelligent mind behind the whole thing? It doesn't.
I think the other thing that it does, this curriculum that Cheryl chose all those years ago that we're still using, I think the other main thing it does is it teaches students not to be afraid of knowledge, not to fear things that they don't understand, but to know that there's no way where you can get through all of this and come out of high school thinking you know it all. The more you study, the more you learn, the more you mature, the more you read and talk about philosophy and how they were trying to figure it out, the more I think that you would recognize that we're just not capable of comprehending it all.
Cheryl called that ignorance awareness.
Yeah.
Very Socratic.
Yeah. We just, as a little side note to just that, we just finished our high school retreats. So we went off, to Eastern Kentucky and we ran around in the woods at night for the boys' retreat. And there was a little more running around in the woods than should have been. But we dealt with that too. That was a lot of fun. So I actually had a lot of fun doing it too.
I bet.
But just listening to some of the seniors' testimonies at the end. I won't mention names just to not embarrass anybody, but a senior got to the end and practically said, just verbatim what you said, like, I thought that this was not worth my time. Like I thought that all of this was just something I had to get through, that I just had to like grit my teeth and just get through. But now standing here after going through what these teachers have labored over and what these teachers have taught me and like tried to show me about the world and about myself and about God, I realized it wasn't that was wrong. It was me that was wrong. And it's just, I mean, it'll bring a tear to your eyes. Just like listening to a senior who like, I kind of worried about a little bit. But just at the end to just realize that, wow, there is more there that I've not even just scratched the surface and that it is worthy of my consideration. We were talking about the goals of the upper school earlier. That's the goal, right? That's the objective of the upper school there. Yeah.
And we didn't talk about history, but the modern history, but
we do it thoroughly.
We do it thoroughly, and it's the same goals as we're having in the literature and what you just mentioned, Jeremy, right? Like it's really and history gives us a narrative based way of helping the students see how humans make mistakes, how humans rise to the occasion. And we get to know our own stories.
You can memorize a bunch of facts about history, but outside of a context, they're not going to make much sense, and you're not going to remember them either. So I think the way we teach history is through the great stories.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're memorable and they're meaningful.
They're memorable, and I mean, we can look at them and say, like, we're not the only people that have ever done this. Like, we're not the only people who have ever thought this. Like, we're not the only people who have ever tried this. Maybe we're trying it in novel ways, but I love the study of history because it cools us down. Like, it slows us down to realize that, like, we're not the only ones that thought we were the best.
That's right.
Or the most advanced.
That's right.
Et cetera,
and
et cetera.
beware.
Yeah. So as everybody's like running around with their hair on fire, history would say, take it easy.
Yeah. Other people have had their hair on fire before you.
Yeah.
Right?
Don't make the same stupid mistake that we've made several times before.
Yeah.
And I think the if we're ending here, I think we also need to say that if, you could listen to this and think, oh, we're so far behind because there's no way we've got the time left to do this. But any of this that you do will be a help. And you don't have to have the whole 12 years that we've laid out here over 3 episodes. Whatever you have is worth doing and worth your students' time and your time. And if it's just the Iliad and the Odyssey, it's enough.
And it's good. Like just that in and of itself is good. It's never, ever, ever too late to start.
That's right.
Like that's a
and
story
we started
about myself.
as adults.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And that listener positive feedback I read at the beginning, right, where she said, I started teaching my kids, I think what it was for kindergarten, second grade or something. And she that year has read Anna Karenina and Scarlet Letter. And it's not too late even for her. She's not in school anymore, right?
Yeah.
But she's learning on her own.
Yeah, it's not too late for the parent either.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I mean, there's so many. I was just at a homeschool conference, and so many people who are doing this program or you know, a classical program, they're learning things that they're getting an education they never got before, and they're educating themselves. And you end up with all these very well-educated homeschool mothers who need to go to the local classical school and offer to teach. Just saying.
Yes. And you can do that learning on your own. You can do it in community. We do have memoriacollege.org for those that want community in doing that.
Did you say memoriacollege.org?
I did say memoriacollege.org.
Okay, let's stop.
But
We also have Memoria Academy.
we also for students and
students.
And there are adult classes there too in the summer that are short, you know, if you want to learn some Latin or other things. There are a lot of resources for that, but also, you know, just if we can give our students this feeling of that this is not a 13-year sprint and you're done.
That's
right.
No.
This is a 13-year sprint because you have a luxury
lifelong learning.
of actually dedicating time to it in those 13 years.
Yeah,
and after that, you should be scraping and fighting to find time to continue that.
Yeah.
But also, if you have any comments or questions for us, you can reach out to us at podcast@memoriapress.com, and maybe we'll make a series based on your question.
That's right.
Have a great week.
Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.